honest with you guys. Since that the recent Casagrandes episode centers around ghosts, which gave me ghost flashbacks from the Loud House, mainly the season 5 episodes, it came to the conclusion for me that this show is just desperate to try to do everything it can in order to do different things. Like, I understand that some of you guys are getting sick of these fantasy elements, but for me personally, for a new fan that just came in, I don't consider this as a big issue. And I'm going to be discussing mostly on that topic once I finish my Lincoln Loud video from beginning to end. After watching Phantom Freakout along with Ghost from the Loud House in preparation for this video, I have to be honest with you, both episodes aren't great, but at the same time, they're not terrible from my perspective. Because of the way I look at it, it really feels like that the elements of what makes an episode involving ghosts are good. It's just that how they're placed in that made both episodes difficult to take it seriously, especially when it has elements that we want to see involving both shows. While Loie is dealing with a ghost that is haunting her in Fairway University while she's struggling to keep her golf team to victorious, this episode Phantom Freakout from the Casagrandes centers around Ryan and Sid all in 12 is midnight, but then Ghost completely haunts them to the point that they can't be able to perform. To be honest with you, the plot involving the Casagrandes is somewhat nonsensical and really low effort compared to the Loud House's Ghost, but for me personally, I'm starting to convince that with less effort really means something when an episode like this is better than Ghost. Because after thinking about it onto why people have left the show, is because it overshadows Loie's development in her time in Fairway University. And upon watching this episode, regardless if the ghost was a former golf player at Fairway University, it really sums up onto why the down-to-earth elements is completely gone. I mean, there is down-to-earth moments in the later seasons of the Loud House, but what people really expected those moments was Loie in her time in college. If you ask me, the moments involving Lucy and the Monstitious Club in the second half of this episode, along with Lincoln and Clyde doing their ghost hunting tactics in this episode, doesn't really fit for an episode involving Loie, which is saying something considering that this is the first episode where Loie is in college and one of the few episodes involving her in college. I tried to give this episode the benefit of the doubt considering that the ghost, who is Shanks by the way, is full of free-spirited for the team that he's part of in the past, but considering that since that he's gone and this leads to Loie's team dealing with issues at the golf course, then the down-to-earth elements in this episode doesn't mean anything. Well, we're just going to have to rely on a ghost that Loie isn't fully familiar with up until now. As for the Casagrandes, I was mostly against the idea of the director picking this location, the haunted house, for 12 is Midnight's music video, but considering that they're in a tight budget and the director doesn't really believe in ghosts whatsoever, I don't really blame her completely, because anyone who's grown up and not realizing that ghosts are a thing, then I can't really fault them completely. I can instantly say that the elements in this episode is fantasized realistic compared to the Loud House. And when I say fantasize realistic, it's mainly for how it doesn't try too hard to develop its characters. Like, I understand that the bits where one of the members of 12 is Midnight turns into musical instruments, but at the same time, it's somewhat humorous, but cute in a weird way. I'm not saying that as a creepy way, but considering that Ryan and Sid are diehard 12 is Midnight fangirls, then I think this is pretty much a dream come true for them if it happened in their dreams. Granted, they will probably prefer the 12 is Midnight boys to be in different instruments like pop or a record player or anything that doesn't involve classical instruments, but I realize that this could be the final appearance involving 12 is Midnight, since that they're mostly exclusive in the Casagrandes. Granted, I could be wrong that they could return in the following season of the Loud House, but at the same time, it really feels like they're trying to end off with the 12 is Midnight characters with a bang with this episode, even if it's one of the most awkward ways imaginable. When it comes to the Loud House, in this episode in particular, I understand that some people may like it, and for me personally, it's not one of the worst episodes, even in Season 5. But the fact that this is overshadowing Lori's development in college, and in the future episode, well, she returns home for a day to reunite with the other characters, it really feels like that they don't care much about Lori's development in college and mostly focusing on ghost elements. Granted, it did involve Lori possibly losing her scholarship if her team loses, but that's about it. And knowing full well that Lori got development after Season 2, well, she learns to improve on herself when it comes to her experiences with Garth, not to mention the fact that it has foreshadowing of her moving out, then I can understand onto why people expected more from Lori's character when she moved into Fairway University. Like, if you can compare it to this Lori and the Lori from the earlier seasons, there's a huge difference in character development. And seeing her being paranoid while her hair is coming out, maybe a running gag, but at the same time, it doesn't work out for me knowing full well that they're just trying way too hard to make this comical, and yet at the same time, this is mostly overshadowing Lori's development in the environment that she's in. The additions of Clinton McCloud and Lucy and the Morticia's Club in this does somewhat work involving ghost elements, but when it comes to the environment that they're in, Fairway University, it doesn't really work. Granted, Lori called Lincoln and Clyde to come over to help, but at the same time, knowing full well that in the second half of this episode where Lucy and her classmates are involved, it really feels like this episode is mostly unfocused. And while Lori is the main character of this episode, the focus that she gets in this isn't what we expect, since that we expect down-to-earth material from the Loud House, but that's just me discussing the old fans of the Loud House. With this problem in mind, it's actually sad that the Casagrandes episode is better than the Loud House episodes because it didn't include that issue. Like, if this show aired at the same time as the Loud House with two shows that you have two options to watch, you would probably have the same opinions when it comes to this episode if the characters were fleshed out. But considering that the spin-off doesn't require a lot of fleshing out whatsoever, it's difficult to go against it. Well, the main episode from the Loud House has this glaring issue that can really damage the ideal of fantasy elements in the Loud House universe. With this being the latest Casagrandes episode, I'm not really surprised that there's going to be more elements. Granted, when it comes to the latest episodes of the Loud House recently, I'm not surprised with so many magical elements or fantasy elements, but knowing full well that the Casagrandes has this element and does it better by not having the issue of what the Ghost episode has, is really saying something, especially since that the ghost elements in this episode is better compared to what Loey is dealing with in the ghost episode. Like, if you really want me to be invested with Loey's situation involving a ghost that is haunting her for the sake of having her team to get the win, then actually make Loey a bit egotistical. I mean, granted, you can argue that it's not really her character when it comes to playing golf, but after gaining some confidence after the season 3 episode, it really shows that she's improving a lot more. But when she's completely haunted by a ghost and she is getting paranoid over it, it's difficult to take it seriously when it's mostly played for laughs. The second half of this episode honestly feels like an excuse to have Lucy in the Morticia's Club be part of something, and considering I'm not a fan of these characters, not because of the season 4 episode A Grave Mistake, but it's most likely the fact that they're mostly boring, even if it's mostly the character that I'm not into. Like, it honestly feels like that this could have been in the episode involving Clyde and Loey, knowing forward that they've pretty much moved on from the whole Clyde having a crush with Loey, and seeing these two characters working together in this scenario involving the ghost haunting Loey, it will probably work out. Like, I know it's mostly for fan service when it comes to moving on from previous seasons, but considering that Clyde's obsession with Loey died down off screen, then, to be honest with you, this episode really feels a lot more weirder when you take into consideration that after Clyde had found some love of girls of his age, it's difficult to see how he would have felt of what he truly feels about Loey now. I mean, you could say that they're friends, but at the same time, you will probably witness that type of formula in other episodes from other cartoons, mainly Gravity Falls involving Dipper and Wendy. Speaking of Clyde, in this episode, Phantom Freakout, and in the Loud House episode, Saving Royal Woods, his voice actor has hit puberty, and to be honest, the fact that they're working on the live action series of the Loud House, it's no surprise that they didn't want to change roles of the actor, because they are still using them in order to give recognition towards the live action series. I've actually noticed this issue when I first watched Save Royal Woods, but after watching this episode, it's somewhat distracting. Like, the fact that Nickelodeon has changed actors due to puberty, mainly the child actors, it honestly made Clyde in Phantom Freakout a teenager, which honestly makes the jokes centering around him difficult to find any humorous around it. Like, in previous jokes involving Clyde's character with previous actors does work since that he didn't hit puberty, but upon watching this episode, it really feels like that Nickelodeon is just desperate to make sure that people can recognize this actor once the live action series is done. But if you ask me, it just proves to me that they're just trying everything to have everyone watch the live action series of The Loud House, even though that people are really against it after watching the Christmas movie. Anyway, the ending will Narciso, who is the ghost name in Phantom Freakout, is impressed with 12 is Midnight's classical performance by using instruments, really made me entertained compared to what the ghost episode did involving Loey and the ghost that she's dealing with. Like, if you really think about it, it just sums up everything onto why that this episode can do something better by not taking itself too seriously compared to the ghost episode. Well, the death of a former golf player at Fairway University is just haunting a person for the sake of just trying to get everyone together, and yet at the same time is just gonna give Loey more trauma as it is. Yeah, if I was a golf player like Loey in this episode, I would find it hard to believe of what anything of what Shanks is saying or what he's trying to do, and yet at the fact that he is just doing everything just to haunt Loey for the sake of just trying to get the team back together. May I remind you that Loey was just trying to get some confidence in the Season 3 episode. This episode proves to me that she's just losing her confidence because of a ghost. Believe me when I say this, is that when those elements come together in this episode, it's further proof that the down-to-earth elements would have worked a lot more better without any involvement of ghosts of what this episode is trying to do. The episode tries to convince me to feel bad for Loey, but for how it's executed and the fact that it just takes away the elements of down-to-earth, then I can't. I mean, granted, I'm not against Loey whatsoever, since that she didn't do anything to deserve to get haunted by Shanks, but my gosh, I can really tell onto why that it's difficult to find this episode good when it comes to these issues in mind. This episode only gave me emptiness instead of feeling disappointed, which really sums up onto why that in the Lincoln Loud video, I'm going to be discussing onto why these elements either damage or just do nothing with Lincoln Loud's character. Because if anything, it kind of sums up onto why that these changes are only happening for either the mediocre or worst ways. Getting into Phantom Freakout, it really feels like that this is supposed to be another crossover episode with Lincoln and Clyde being part of it, but after witnessing that in previous episodes involving the Casagrandes, it's not really a surprise. But at the same time, this episode is just slightly better compared to Ghost. Believe me when I say this, the more I compare episodes from the Lighthouse and Casagrandes in the future of this channel, there's going to be a lot of differences of what makes an episode better compared to the other, and believe me, there are all going to be episodes involving the Lighthouse that are better than the Casagrandes, just not episodes like these. If you ask me, if this type of episode happened in an original cartoon, it would still be good, but at the same time, it would not get as much recognition since it's not part of the Lighthouse universe. But what do I know, considering that the Casagrandes are coming to an end soon, and when it comes to the final episode that is somewhat legit, let's just say that it's gonna be another comparison video if it is what I think it is. Anyway, I'm giving the Lighthouse's Ghost a 5 out of 10, while the Casagrandes' Phantom Freakout gets a 6 out of 10. The only thing I can hope for the next Lighthouse vs. Casagrandes video is that both episodes have to be good, and yes, I am gonna be comparing the Halloween episodes with each other once we head into October.